Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good morning, folks. I'm Tom Ivester, and I'm an alcoholic. I hear you, Kevin. Great to be here. It's a real pleasure to be here at the New York and New England Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous. I haven't met 6 rednecks since I've been here. Count me and Charlie. Really has been neat, and I am thrilled and delighted to announce, and I know it'll be no grim news, that this is the last meeting, folks. Some of you have been here longer than Shamu, I believe. It's Wednesday. I've been here since Thursday, and it really has been great. One of the advantages of being the last speaker on the program, one of many, is that, as a rule, folks don't know you. And then after you speak at a meeting like this, everybody knows you, and they're sort of talking or criticizing you or whatever to do, after you get through. And one of the advantages is, when nobody knows you, is that you can just sort of wander around and just be around folks that you don't know. And I've had some delightful meetings between meetings with people I'd never seen before in my life. And they just knew that I was a guy named Tom from somewhere. Most of the time, I don't pay any attention when you tell folks where you're from anyway. So I just thoroughly enjoyed that part of this convention. And it really has been a good one. It's a little intimidating. This ain't my first outing, but I swear that there has been an absolutely dynamite lineup of speakers here. It's just been tremendously, tremendously impressive. It's a... Some of them talked a little too strong. That's throat discs. I don't know whose that is. It's a little intimidating, though, when you're the last speaker and you've heard some powerful messages. That old-timers panel, Charlie, was an absolute thing of beauty. That was just great to see. And it kind of reminded me of something I learned. I haven't learned quite as heady stuff as our speaker last night, Bob. I didn't know those swells lived that long. Those are not the beach swimmers that live that long. They must be incredibly dumb animals, too, by the way. But anyway, I've learned stuff. I'm just overwhelmed with things I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And up in my area, there may be some areas here like that, I live in Aberdeen, North Carolina, and that's a little town that adjoins Southern Pines and Pinehurst. And the only thing we do up there is play golf and ride horses. And horses, I didn't know this, but I was impressed going around and looking at the beautiful horse farms with the fact that most of them will have a group of beautiful thoroughbred horses, and in the middle of it is a mule. And I never understood that. I thought maybe it was a pet, that folks just like mules. But then I learned that mules have a particularly valuable effect on thoroughbreds. Thoroughbreds get very high-strung, and they run into walls and, fight each other and do bizarre things. And you put an old mule in there, and he brings them back down to earth. He just sort of gets them civilized and humane. That's my function here at this convention. I don't want you to leave here on a cloud of blue. I want you to leave here with your feet solidly on the ground. Me too. I was going to talk about being old-timers till I listened to that, and my God. There are a peculiar problem with being an old-timer, and I was going to talk about that a little bit till I listened to them, and I swear I feel like a newcomer. My sobriety date is Groundhog Day, 1957. That's the day I came. And yeah, I guess as Harriet said, there's a point where you just have to accept the fact that you are becoming an old-timer. I really don't feel that way. There are some problems associated with being an old-timer, and that's obvious when you look around. Now, today was a little bit of an exception. I've been to conferences with 500 and 600 people, where with no more sobriety than I have, I've been the oldest rat in the barn by 10 or 15 years. And that's an interesting thing to me, and it's a very sad thing to me, in that it must demonstrate that there's something happens in the lives of many alcoholics in the progression of their sobriety so that they drift off somewhere. And I'm not sure what they do, but many of them stay sober, never have another drink. And somehow or other I have difficulty relating to that. I have difficulty relating to the fact that this program reaches a point where it becomes sort of passé in somebody's life. I can't do that because I'm just as active in this program today as I've ever been in my life. Probably as much, if not more so, in some ways. Not only am I just as active, but I am recipient of just as much as I've ever received in my life. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is just as vital in my life today as it's ever been, just as important, just as dynamic, just as influential as it's ever been, and maybe even more so. And on the face of it, that may seem a little bit surprising. This is the only thing I'm going to say about old-timers, Charlie. Y'all done that. But there's something in that that's pretty important for me. What I find is that, well, it makes sense when I think about it this way. Today, just like you, I have many problems. Today, just like you, I live with a great deal of stress and tension, anxiety, frustration. It's a pretty tough world in lots of ways. When I think back to what my life was like when I drank, it was a much simpler existence. I didn't have a lot of problems when I drank. I had some big ones, but very few of them. Biggest problem was either getting sober or getting drunk. That was about the size of it. I didn't have any mortgage payments. I didn't own a house. A great deal of the time, I didn't even have rent payments because I didn't have a home. I didn't have a lot of money trouble. I didn't have any money. If you got no money, you got no money trouble. You got some ain't got no money trouble. I didn't have a family problem. I had no family. I had no problems with decisions and commitments and responsibility and all of those things that are part and parcel of what sobriety brings. So when I look at it that way, what I've exchanged is a very simple life for a very complicated life. And what I find is that rather than a diminishing need for this program, I find an increasing need for this program. And I attribute that to the fact that, now this may not make any sense, and if it doesn't, talk to your sponsor. Over the years, I have become more and more impressed with how very little this program has to do with drinking. And as a matter of fact, how little it has to do with not drinking. I don't know about you, but this is certainly the case with me. I've not had a drinking problem since the day I came in Alcoholics Anonymous. I haven't had a drink. And if you don't drink, you ain't got no drinking problem. You got an ain't drinking problem or something. What this program, to me, is not a snake bite kit for drinking. Every one of us quit drinking before we got here. And the rest of the time, we deal with the aftermath of that and learning how to live in a way that we don't need to drink. And that has underscored how this program means so much in my life, because I use Alcoholics Anonymous in everything that I do. I use it in my business life. I use it in my profession. I use it in my personal life. I use it in my family. I use it in traffic. I use it out on the beach. I use Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's given me the ability to not only cope and survive, but to actually thrive in a world that has changed drastically in my lifetime. So I'm deeply grateful for this program, and I'm grateful for the fact that there's room for the older member who still wants to be intensely involved, and that's me. That, I don't know exactly why I became an alcoholic. Drank too much booze would be the simple thing to say. I was one of those people who experienced what I guess all of us do. You hear it described a lot of ways, but I always had, as far back as I can remember, that sense of restlessness and discontent that seems to be so characteristic of our lives. I was born either damned or blessed with an inability to accept my place in life. I didn't like who I was. I didn't like where I lived. I didn't like the people that I lived with. I didn't like how I felt. I didn't like how I looked. I was a guy who was just absolutely discontented with everything about my life. I knew that the rest of the world didn't look like my piece of it, and I didn't like it. So I was a guy who when I found booze, found a tremendous solution in my life. And I'm a guy who's never had one normal drink in his entire life. I can't recall a single time that I took a drink that I didn't want another. I can't recall a single time that I didn't take another if I had it. I was that kind of dude. I guess the logic was there that if a little bit does a little good, a whole lot will do a whole lot more. And I was absolutely in trouble with booze right from the very beginning. I don't believe I was born an alcoholic. I personally don't think there's any such things. I do appreciate the proclamation, Don, that alcoholism is hereditary, and I believe that. Yeah, I believe that. My tree's about like a lot of us. You find them there. My father, ironically enough, you may be interested to know, stopped drinking just as when he was 24 years old. He stopped drinking because a man he respected told him that's what he ought to do. And for 52 years, till the day he died, he never had another drink. I stopped drinking when I was 24. I hope I make 52. I'm planning on it. I hope that's hereditary too. I don't believe there's any such thing as a born alcoholic. I believe I was either shaped early or developed quickly. That propensity toward alcohol, I guess, is what I've heard it called. Because it did a great deal for me, and I drank too much. I was essentially a heavy problem drinker. I got drunk, I got in trouble, I got in fights, I threw up a lot, I got put in jail, wrecked cars, lost jobs. I was not an alcoholic. Alcoholism is not determined by external events. It has to do with internal conditions, I believe. And my alcoholism is not measured by how many times my nose was broken, how many jails I was in, or how many cars I wrecked, how much money I lost, how many wives. It's measured in terms of what happened to me. I was a guy who was just restless and ill at ease and discontented with life, and alcohol gave me what I needed to settle down and comfortably be a part of what was going on. I'd have been a fool not to drink. My alcoholism came into being when I was about 18 years old. Now, certainly I had no awareness of that then. There was no bell that went off. There was no awareness. It was simply something that I observed with hindsight. And when I look back on my life and examine what happened, the thing that's apparent to me is that along in that time, my drinking became something different than what it had been. Up to that point, I had been pretty much a one-night stand artist. But at some point, along in my 18th year, that changed. And even though I didn't change radically in the amount that I drank or when I drank or where, there was a difference in that from that day to this day. My life was to never be the same. And my chemistry wore out or something, Don. There was something happened so that I lost the ability to control my drinking. Up to that point, my drinking was an elective activity, and I think I could have stopped any time I wanted. I never wanted. From the 18th year to this day, my life changed so that if I took one drink, I would get drunk. I didn't know that then, and I fought fiercely to prove that it was not true. But the simple fact was that every time I drank, I irresistibly got drunk. That was alcoholism. And from that point on, it was the typical kind of story of alcoholism. Drinking too much, prolonged drinking bouts, starting to get drunk with reckless abandon, starting to get on prolonged kind of things, starting to have blackouts, starting to have shakiness, starting to lose it, starting to have periodic brushes with the monkeys, periodic points when I would wake up someplace beat up and broken up and not even know how I got there, and be hearing things and stuff like that. The classic stuff that happens to most alcoholics. I started to get into a lot of trouble with booze. I set up a pattern of going to jail with sickening regularity. I don't to this day know how many times I've been in jail. I know Dick mentioned being, 23 times locked up. I have no earthly idea how many times, and it really isn't that important to me. It's a rather relative term. They were all the same. I've been in jails that were 2 days old and some that were 200 years old, and they all looked about alike. They all had cockroaches, and they were all very uncomfortable. I started the rapid road downhill. I started losing it. I fought trying to pretend that each time I changed something it would be different, trying desperately to prove that I was not in trouble. And my life became essentially a series of new beginnings. And every time I would get disgusted enough, I would vow to quit and never drink again, and invariably find myself going right back. And each time I would reach that point, I would resolve to do something, and each time my goals were a little bit lower. And I started sinking into a level of life that I didn't even know existed. Sometimes it's really difficult for me to comprehend what happened in my own life. Alcohol was a very devastating thing in my life. I got into serious trouble with it when I was 16, and I had what I hope and pray was my last drink when I was 24. When I look at the two ends of that, it's difficult to believe that happened to one guy, but many of you have had the same experience. Serious trouble at 16, and by the time I was 24, I'd reached a point that I was living on the street, unemployed, darn near unemployable. If I got a job, I'd hold it a few days or a few weeks at best, and then would either get fired or more often just get drunk and not show up. Never believed I would ever wind up in that kind of condition. Never believed that my drinking would take me to that kind of end. I never believed I was an alcoholic. I knew I was in trouble. I knew that I was losing it. I knew that I was becoming a pretty shabby character. Last year that I lived, that's how I lived. I lived on the streets. And I came close, perilously close, to moving that one step beyond where most of us never go. You and I are not acquainted with a level of alcoholism that happens to some of our fellows. There are some who just give up and rarely, if ever, make it back. Rarely, if ever. Most of us didn't get there, thank God. I came perilously close, and I pray God that I never forget how close I came to just totally surrendering to the condition, and I dare say I'd still be there or more likely dead today. 24 years old, and a homeless, wasted street character. I used to say that I lived by my wits. Simple fact is, I live by my total lack of character. I don't know of one thing, and I'm not proud of this by any means, but I don't know of anything that a man can do that I haven't done. Not one single thing. And I'm not proud of that. I wish I could tell you that one bright, sunny day I had enough and realized there had to be a better way and reached out for help and somebody was there, but that's simply not the case. I stayed there a little too long. And many of you know that on my way to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't get here quite soon enough because I stayed out there long enough to do the kind of thing that I think every alcoholic in the world fears doing. Never have met an alcoholic, particularly those who have experienced blackouts, who hasn't lived with a rather nagging fear that somehow or other in a drunken mess they might do great harm to somebody else that can't be undone. And most alcoholics really don't want to hurt anybody. Most alcoholics are pretty sensitive people. I stayed there a little too long. And I wound up doing what every alcoholic fears. Woke up in jail one morning, and I took it for granted that I was in there for the same thing I was always in there for, drunk or getting thrown through a window or whatever. And after I was awake for a while, the jailer came by, a guy I knew. I asked him when I could get out, and he said, I hope never. and walked off. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I knew he wasn't kidding. And then some of the other fellows told me there in the bullpen that the night before, I'd been driving somebody's car down the main street of that city and had struck and killed 2 people. I guess my reaction was predictable. I guess it was just like anybody's would be. I simply could not accept it. I could not deal with it. And my response was just to sort of block it out and pretend it wasn't so, but then gradually accepted the fact that indeed I had done more damage than any drunk ever ought to be allowed to do. It's a matter then of picking up, where do you go from there? How do you balance the scales between a street drunk and 2 fine young people with their lives in front of them? Well, obviously you don't. The only time I'd ever been in jail, I didn't try to get out. I didn't want out. And then after a while, somebody contacted my mother down in North Carolina. I was in the state of Michigan. And that dear lady made what was to be her last trip to anybody's jail to get her son out. She died the day after Thanksgiving last year. And one of my prayers of gratitude is that this program for 29 years gave her a son that was responsible and that could pay back a little. She made her last trip to get me out. And I didn't want out, didn't know how to tell her that. I was charged with manslaughter, and that was in July, and I was to be tried in November. I was released on bond after 76 days. I knew I would never drink again. And I meant it. Knew it then, knew it now. I knew that I wouldn't drink. I stayed sober a day and a half. And then for the next few months, I drank like nobody I've ever seen. I have worked with hundreds, probably thousands, of alcoholics over the past 29 years. Never one like me. I was a guy who just absolutely did give up. And my constant objective was to drink myself to death. And there was no mystery about that then or now. I knew that. And then November the 19th, 1956. Sometimes Sam mentioned to me that sometimes it's kind of confusing. I mentioned my sobriety date is Groundhog Day, and my last drink was November 19th, the preceding year, 56. That was the police department's fault. And they took care of it, and then in February the following year I went into the program. That's where life started. I went to court that day, November the 19th, and had my last drink, a little piece of a bottle of gin, and went in to be tried. I thought my plea was rather eloquent. I stood mute because I didn't even know what I'd done. I knew what they told me I had done. And I was obviously convicted and sentenced to 5 to 15 years, state prison, southern Michigan. I thought many times, probably the cruelest sentence they could have given would have been if the judge had just simply said, go live with yourself. But they were kinder. And I knew what that meant. Now, when you're a street character, the potential for that kind of thing's always there. And I was a jail character, but going to penitentiary was a different ball game. And the next day, I walked into Jackson Prison in Jackson, Michigan. It happens to be the largest walled institution in the world. And in my somewhat educated opinion, I truly believe it's the worst one that I know. San Quentin, John, maybe, that's a pure zoo. But none of them are very nice, but Jackson is without a doubt a weird place. And I knew deep in my heart that I'd never come out of there alive. And I, honest to God, did not care. Just a piece of human wreckage filed away for who knows how long. It was done. Little did I know, I heard somebody mention that this is the land of beginning again. Little did I know that would be the case with me. Shortly after I got there, I was introduced to this program by a little social worker who probably never had 3 drinks in his life. And he pointed the way for me, told me there was a group, I'd never heard of it, and lo and behold, I never had a drink since. I don't think you have to have a profound knowledge of alcoholism to help alcoholics. All you got to do is have enough concern and moxie to point the way. I walked into that first meeting February 2nd, 1957. I didn't know exactly what to expect, and it's probably just as well. Because whatever I expected, I'd have probably been surprised anyway. And I sat down and listened, just like you did, to the first meeting I'd ever heard. And I swear, I couldn't believe it. Now, some of it was to be expected. It was a little religious sounding. They did a lot of reading and stuff and praying and carrying on. They didn't do any singing. I thought they would, but I was real relieved when they did. And I was a guy who had no faith, so it was a little scary to me when they got into that spiritual business. And then they introduced the speaker. And the man was a fellow by the name of Shy Walker from Kalamazoo, Michigan. He's been dead now for a number of years. And I sat and listened to that man tell his story. And I swear to God, I had never heard anything like that. I'd heard all kinds of stuff from drunks. Fighting stories, bank robbing stories, women's stories. I never heard one tell his story. And that's what he did. He told about his life. And I sat there in utter amazement. Now, I was a street character, not a hothouse flower. I was about as close to shock-proof as a guy could get. But that was shocking to me to see somebody tell that stuff. And I thought, God knows, why would he do it? Nice-looking man in a blue preaching suit. And I thought for a while that he was sort of down on his luck, and the state gave him a little allowance to come in and entertain the monkeys or something. I really didn't. I'm sure they talked about that. I'm helping you because it helps me, and that ain't the way it worked where I live. On the streets, you get a chance to help somebody, all right, more than you want. I didn't relate to anything about that man. He was as different from me as anybody that I've ever known. He became my first sponsor. Loved him dearly, loved him better than Peter loved the Lord. Great guy, truly great guy. Simple man, little short fellow. Oh, he looked okay from a distance. but if you got close, he couldn't stand close examination because he'd been some of everything in the world, including a gangster and all kind of stuff. God knows, I never heard anything like that. He'd been a professional fighter, and apparently not a very good one. He was a beat-up dude. And I listened to that. I didn't relate to it whatsoever. He was really a different guy. But I came back to the next meeting. And I don't know why, because I was not looking for help. I knew that I was totally unworthy. I knew that I wasn't decent enough to even receive help from anybody. I had no desire to stop drinking. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I was not a great candidate, I don't think. But I came back. And many, many times I've wondered about, what brought me back. Why did I come back? I didn't have to. I could have sat in my cell and stared at my navel or, whatever it is that you do when you ain't drinking. But I came back. And I think there was one reason for it. And it was the enthusiasm of this man. I'm a great appreciator of enthusiasm. I'm a great believer that enthusiasm is magic. I'm a great believer that enthusiasm is contagious. I'm a great believer that enthusiasm has healing quality for alcoholics. Because I remember how much that meant to me. Even though I didn't articulate it, in my mind, I think I must have just recognized, or maybe more importantly in my heart, I must have recognized that maybe, just maybe, there was something here for me. And I launched out on this program. I'm going to try to get through some stuff and get us on the road here. I got a lot I want to tell you, but I'm going to tell you quick, so y'all listen fast. You're about 90% Yankees anyway, so y'all... I want to try to capture and share, if I can, what happened. Now, and I don't mean to get too dogmatic in this thing. I want to have a little fun, but I'm not somebody that's a basic fun person. I have a ball everywhere I go, but I don't ever want to get to thinking that that's the priority. So I want to talk about some things that I think are essential to my recovery and are essential to this program in terms of what makes it go and grow. I don't want to preach, but I want to share my experience in those terms. What is it that happens? Because here I was, just a 24-year-old kid sitting in a group, most folks in there far older than me, not believing I was an alcoholic, not feeling worthy of being there, feeling totally different and isolated from every other person in the room. Now, what happened? I kept going back. And for the longest kind of time, I was a total outsider in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was as much the isolate in this program as I ever was on a bar stool. a totally outside person. I was not part of what was going on. I was spectator of what was going on. The first 8 months in this program, I think, were as miserable as any period I've ever spent in my life. There were some things happening, but I wasn't even aware of it. I was a great reader. I've always been an avid reader, and I read everything I could get my hands on. I listened to speakers, and there were things going. I appreciated the fellowship, although not very knowingly, but I appreciated the fellowship. So there were some things going on. Many, many times I think back to what was it that made the difference? What was it that made the difference there? And I remember the tremendous value of the enthusiasm, the inspiration that came to me from Alcoholics Anonymous members. I remember those people like Shai and many others who used to come into that institution and spread a little joy, who used to come in there and talk to us clowns with things that we could aspire to, the example of their lives. And I remember what an exhilarating thing that was. Yeah, I'm one who believes that this is truly a God-given program. Now, I won't try to explain this, but let me simply make a point. Yeah, I mentioned my drinking being in 2 levels, problem drinking and alcoholism, and I think recovery is basically in 2 stages. One, I believe that it's an absolute, unmerited, unworthy, unexpected gift of God. A living miracle, Don, as you said. I believe... I believe very much that every one of us here today is here because of the benevolent action of God. Now, I don't mean that we heard a psychotic-sounding voice that said, go to AA. It might have come at the end of a judge's gavel or a policeman's blackjack or a wife's pointed shoe, whatever. But there was something caused it to happen, and it was a totally unmerited action. Any of us deserve to be here? Of course, we usually go through a brief period where we say, why me? And then later on, with total incredulity, we say, why me? What happens? An unmerited thing. And I believe that all of us find our ways here by those forces. And I believe that we get actually a free ride. Think back to the first few months that you had in this program as I think back to mine. For 8 months, I was a fly on the wall. For 8 months, I was a non-participant. For 8 months, I was not an alcoholic. I was a guy who just found himself in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was given to me. It was given to me with absolutely no worthiness on my part, no desire, no effort. And I believe that happens to every one of us, that we get a free ride. It doesn't always last 8 months. Sometimes it lasts much shorter. But we all have it. Where we just get it. And all we have to do is show up, and it happens. We just follow the crowd. Don't have to work steps, read books, do nothing. Show up. And it happens. And I believe just as much that it also ends. It also ends. And I believe during that 8-month period, God's agents were working on me. Those guys were carrying the message to me in terms that I couldn't understand very well, but they were having their influence. Free ride. I was home free. And then one day something happened to make that change. I believe that there is a program here that gives recovery. And I believe just as surely as I believe God gave it to me, there came a day when He, in effect, said, well, old boy, the free ride's over. It's time to go to work. And it came to me this way. I went to a meeting one day, and a guy spoke by the name of Johnny from Flint, Michigan. And he spent the entire meeting talking about nothing but the 4th step. Went into great detail about the step, read part of it out of the book, talked about the critical importance of writing the inventory. And when he got through, I said, okay, I'm going to do that. Now, I knew what he was talking about. I'd read the book. I understood what he was talking about in my own distorted way. I went back to my cell, and I took out the old trusty yellow legal pad, and I started to write. Now, I didn't mean to write an inventory. I meant to write a little story about life's cruelties and, you know. You ever see an alcoholic think of anything wrong with him that wasn't somebody else's fault? Anything? No, there ain't no way. And that's what I was doing. I was sort of thinking about what was going on in my life and who caused it and all that stuff. And that's what I meant to do, was sit down and write that. I wrote about 2 lines. And then I discovered unexpectedly the wisdom of the founders when they said, write the inventory. You can't write yourself that foolishness unless you're awfully sick. You got to be awfully sick to write yourself that. Up here, I can rationalize anything I do. I mean, the dumbest things that I could ever imagine, as long as I don't tell nobody, it makes sense, you know. But if I have to tell somebody, my God, it's ridiculous. Well, all at once, I started to write about me. And I'll tell you now, a lot more surely than I would then, that was the best day's work this old boy's ever done. Because all at once, the charade stopped. All at once, I started to write about me. And I've heard a lot of people say that they had great difficulty taking an inventory. I could not have resisted taking that inventory if I wanted, because I was at that point. And all at once, the dam broke, and it just burst forth. And it was a torrent of just racing thoughts, and my hand literally flew, trying to keep up with the torrent of thoughts that poured out. Now, it wasn't any masterpiece. It wouldn't win a Pulitzer Prize. It wasn't even fit for publication, but then it wasn't intended for publication. The best day's work this old boy's ever done, because I knew then that I was an alcoholic, period. Never have doubted that to this day. Never have seriously doubted it to this day. That's the fundamental thing in my life, and this is where this program started for me. You know, I believe that there are basically two sides of this program. I believe it's essentially a people program. And when I think back to what made the difference for me, what made the difference? I appreciate very much the theme of this conference, because if it had not been for a commitment to pass it on, yours truly would not be here today. And when I think back to what made the difference, I remember those guys who stuck out a hand to me when I had absolutely nothing that anybody could possibly want but a broken and wasted life. Little did I know that that's the greatest qualification for the help of this program. I believe it is a pass-it-on program. After I got started in this program one time, I went to Shy. And he was a man who was filled with the magic of enthusiasm every time I ever met him. And like anybody else, he had troubles. And I went to him one day and asked him, I said, why is it that when you go to a meeting, you're always so effervescent, you're always so bubbly and alive? And he said something I don't think I'll ever forget. He said, every time I start to go to a meeting, I remind myself of who I am. I ask myself if I've got anything to be grateful for. I remind myself that I really do have a lot to be grateful for. And then when I go in, there's a good chance that somebody's going to let me tell them I'm an alcoholic. And if they listen very long, they'll probably find out that I've been sober 15 years. And he said, somehow or other, when I tell folks that I'm an alcoholic, been sober 15 years, I feel a sense of responsibility to act like it. To act like it. And did he ever? Did he ever? What a great man. He was a crude little fellow. He never learned to pronounce Alcoholics Anonymous. Never did. He sponsored a speech therapist one time and still could not learn. But he lived it better than anybody I've ever seen. I tried to express some appreciation to him, and he gave me a charge, because he stopped me very quickly. And he said, Tom, you'll never be able to repay anybody for any sincere act they give you in this program. That ain't the way it works. If you appreciate what's been done for you, the only thing you'll ever do is pass it on. The only thing you'll ever need to do. Yeah, that was the thing that started to make the turning point for me. I believe that the Alcoholics Anonymous program is a people program. I also believe it's an action program. I believe that if there is magic here and you spell it action, I believe that it's a do-something program. I don't know of a single soul who's ever accidentally found himself sober. I don't know of a single soul who's accidentally built up a long period of sobriety. It just doesn't happen that way. I believe it's a do-something program. I believe it's a tough program in that it demands something of me. It is a great thing. And the greatest moment that Alcoholics Anonymous will ever know is that moment. That moment. It's not conventions in Orlando, Florida, nice as they are. This is peripheral. This is not basic. This is not fundamental. This is not what makes the stature, the dignity, the nobility of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's what makes the nobility of Alcoholics Anonymous. That man who drew that, by the way, or whatever you do, he may be a pro, but if that ain't a labor of love, I've never seen one. Well, there is a little more. There is a little more. There's something here. There's a great deal more to finding recovery in this program than just inspiration and action, because action can be external, and it may not necessarily involve recovery. It may just involve diversion. There is a thing called getting well here. That's when I think back, and I don't mean to get too hard-nosed with this, but just a little. Yeah, I think about why, and let me tell you why I get a little hard-nosed about it. Unfortunately, this group here today will never meet again. Never again. If we adjourned and reassembled in 15 minutes, the characters would be different. The next time we meet in Miami, Harriet, the next time we meet, we'll deal with the fact that some of us have died. Some of us have gone out to drink again. Some of us will never get back. What we share this moment is a moment in history that'll have its value, and then it'll pass. Not everybody makes it here. Not everybody wants to make it here. What does it take to make it? Why am I a little hard-nosed? Out of the group that I attended with at Jackson Prison, there were 300 members. I know 2 who are sober and active in Alcoholics Anonymous today. 2 out of 300. I know 1 who has been sober since his first meeting. That's this one. That ain't hard to figure out. And if I had to vote on one, that's exactly the one I'd vote for now. I'm not one who ever wants to forget that the odds are pretty doggone stiff. And the ones that make it are the ones who are going to make that commitment that pig made. You're going to have to make that commitment if you're going to make it in this thing, and I believe that. I don't know what happened to those other guys. I know what happened to me. I don't want to forget that. I don't want to forget there was a fellow, and I don't particularly mean to be critical about this, but somewhat. There was a fellow, a good friend of mine. God, he was a good friend of mine, still is. Made a talk one time to a group of people up in North Carolina, and it was a group, 50, 100 people, whatever it is. And in the course of his talk, he made a beautiful sounding statement. He said, rather rhetorically, but he said nonetheless, if one of us has to drink, me or you, the group, if one of us has to drink, I hope it's me instead of you. Now, ain't that wonderful? Ain't that loving? Ain't that dumb? I'll guarantee you, your speaker today ain't that generous. When we meet in Miami or wherever we meet, Harriet, I want to be one of the dudes that's there. I'm like old Eddie that said that there ain't many there, but I want to be one of them. And I think that's part of what it takes, and it's part of what my roots are about. I was not thankful for being in Jackson Prison, but I am deeply thankful for the method and manner by which I was introduced to this program. Because I was taught this program. I was taught this program by people who knew, and they taught it to me in a tough-minded kind of way. I stayed in that loony bin for 3.5 years, for 42 months. And during 42 months, I never had one word of encouragement, support, or appreciation from one soul. And I'm deeply grateful for that today, because it proved to me that you don't have to have it. That's a fringe benefit, folks. It's not basic. Place in the group where it says we don't need to be deceived that we have to have the support of our family. Right, that's right. It's nice if you do. My family is a little bit ambivalent about me being down here in Disney heaven when they haven't seen me for a whole week. They got mixed feelings about it. They support it, but by golly, it's nip and tuck sometimes now. She about to trade me in on a new model, I think. Yeah, I think there's got to be a commitment made to this thing, and you got to mean it. And I'm deeply grateful for the fact that I had that kind of tough introduction. That there were people who were realistic with me, who told me the truth, who were not cruel, but lovingly led me through the things that were difficult to do. I'm deeply grateful for that today. It means a lot. It makes you a little hard-nosed. Now, I'll admit that. It does make you a little hard-nosed. It also makes you a little sober. So I am... It happened for me there. And I started working this program the best I knew how. I fought everything in it. Thank God I lost every fight. Strangely enough, that's the way it works. Alcoholics Anonymous is not something you work. I fought that fallacy for the longest count of time, trying to figure it out, trying to do it, trying to make it work. And then finally, my experience was that each thing that I was up against, I would fight mightily and then get to such a point of utter exasperation that I would just give up. And lo and behold, the miracle happens. You don't work it. And it's the toughest thing in the world for a willful, domineering, omnipotent alcoholic to give up. And that's the beauty of this program. You truly do surrender to win. You truly do die to live. You truly do give it away to keep it. Doesn't make sense, but it works. And that worked for me in Jackson Prison. And when I left there, I knew that I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous when I got out. No question about it. And I'm thankful today for the good basic training that I had. Because when I started to get out, I had contacted a group down in North Carolina about a year before I was to get out. I wrote them a letter and basically said, I'm a guy from North Carolina coming home, and I'd like to know if it's okay if I come to your group. That's all I asked. I didn't ask for a job or money or a loan or a girlfriend or anything else. And they waited for my answer. And I think it's been something like 27 years. And I'm still waiting for my answer. And that rattled me a little. I don't mind telling you, because I thought, sure, there's some dedicated idiots that come in here, but the rest of those blowhards sitting back there polishing their Cadillacs don't want characters like me. And that was really what I was feeling. Thank God I wrote a year in advance, because then I said, well, I'll try again with some guidance. And I wrote to the other group that was listed in the World Directory. I'd written first to the biggest one. I thought they had to be the best one. And then I wrote to the one that had fewer members. That time I got a letter back quicker than the mail could run. And I hadn't asked for much, and they didn't tell me much. They just said, here's how it works around here, here's what we do. And went on talking about the activities, and God, what a beautiful message. And they put one line in there that, well, if you don't think it meant something to me, stop by my house sometime, and I'll show you the letter. Talk about the fact that I'd be welcome. They said, we want you, we need you. Now, that truly is the nobility of this program. That truly is what it's about. And when I hit the ground, my basic training came in. Because even though I love the people mightily in that group, I'll be very frank with you, it was, without a doubt, I think the sorriest meeting I had ever been to. It really was. I'd never been to a meeting that bad in jail. It just a horrible thing. And I was living 20 miles from a fairly large city. And my temptation was to go over to the big city and sort of live it up a little bit. And then a thing that was totally foreign to me came into the picture. I realized that I was a member of 3.5 years standing. And if that was a lousy group, it was my lousy group. And I think probably one of the few wise things I've ever done in my life was not to run and not to go away and not to look for the easier, softer way. And I started participating in that lousy group, and I had the experience of going to a meeting there. Eddie talked about going to a meeting with two. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous completely alone. I mean one member, me. That hard-nosed attitude came in very handy. It was a good meeting, too, by the way. I enjoyed it. And I started working. Yeah, I started dealing with that thing of becoming a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hit the ground running. I was as active as a young goat, and I had a ball. I was absolutely on cloud nine. Got immediately active in my area, and God knows it was just super. I want to share with you, just in wrapping up. I hope my watch is right, because I don't want to drag out. I'm going to quit quick. Let me show you this. Don't you applaud that? Let me tell you what I just want to share with you. A couple of things that happened in the Hope Department, and I do this with mixed feelings, very genuinely, because I've seen, a lot of times when, and I know it's tough sometimes if you're having a rough go, to listen to some yo-yo talk about getting rich and going to heaven and all that stuff, and it can be sickening when you're absolutely nowhere to go tonight. But I remember how much it meant to me when I had absolutely nothing, to hear somebody who had found a way to live that paid off. So in the interest of the people who might be wavering in the Hope Department, let me share with you, because when I left Jackson Prison, I had a rather foolish dream that I might be able to find a job. Anything. Just a job that was honest, that I could work at. I had the foolish dream that I might find one buddy, that I might find a place I could comfortably call home. Never had one. Fool's dream. And I found it. I found a job sweeping the floor on the third shift in a cotton mill. Horrible job, but I loved it dearly. And I got immediately active. And after I was out, the second week I was out, I started over to a little prison group of AA, went over to tote the message. About 2 months after I was out, I became the outside sponsor of that group. Tremendous honor. And along about the same period, my parole supervisor came to me one day and he said, "Tom, you're real active in this AA thing, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And it scared me because I thought he was going to tell me to quit. And I knew I wouldn't. He said, "Wouldn't it help you if you could drive?" And I said, "Yes, sir, but I can't." And it had said on my parole papers, letters that big, "This man's never operated a motor vehicle, this man's never drink alcoholic beverages," and I took that as a matter of fact, a literal fact. He said, "Okay, let me check." A couple weeks later, I got a call from him. He asked me if I could meet him at the Sears store in Gastonia. That's where the license agency was. And I walked in, and this story is true in every detail. I walked in the front of that store, and I saw he and the agent standing back at the back. I walked back to him, and he handed me a driver's license. I didn't take a test. I didn't even pay for it. They didn't even ask me if I could drive. And I know that can't happen. Carol and I were talking about you can't get there from here, and there ain't no way that can happen. I'm sure it was illegal. It had to be illegal. But somehow, I reckon when God's got something for you to do, doors open. Somehow or other, they do. And about 5 months after I was out, they had an election for a district committeeman in my district. I wasn't even running and got elected. And I know a lot of people get it that way, but a lot of people fuss about that kind of experience. Let me tell you, here's one who doesn't. I was deeply grateful. If for no other reason, here were the AA members in 12 cities saying to a guy who just 5 months earlier had wondered if he could find one friend, if he'd ever be trusted by anybody to do anything. And here were my fellow AA members in 12 cities, the people I love most in the world, asking me to be their trusted servant. I was a pretty good one. I was a pretty good DCM. I didn't know a lot of it, but I'll guarantee you if work will do it, it got done. I'm a DCM today, by the way. I've really gone up in AA. Well, after about 2 years I was there and I was doing all those things, I got a phone call one day from the capital of our state. The guy asked for Mr. Ivester, and he got on the phone. And he introduced himself. I'd met him one time at an AA meeting, that little unit. He said he was a big shot with the state. and asked me if I would consider taking a position with the North Carolina prison system. And at first I said, "You sure you know who you're talking to?" And he assured me he did. And I knew that wouldn't happen. But in 1961, as a matter of fact, I was employed by the North Carolina prison system, and for the next 9 years worked primarily with guys with problems just like mine. Had the grand experience of helping to organize and develop some 50 AA groups in that state, and what a tremendous experience. Intertwined lives with guys that are fast friends today. One of them that went to Montreal with me last summer was a fellow that was in those early days that we shared together, stayed in that prison for 19 years and 4 months. Some of you met him in Montreal. I'm happy to report that he still ain't back to earth yet. He's still, what a great delight. Many, many things, war stories galore. 9 years, that was the experience. And then in 1970, I was approached by some people who asked me if I might consider taking over a prison as a superintendent. And I never had really thought about anything like that. I never thought about being in one either, to tell you the truth. And I had mixed feelings. I didn't really want to be a warden or guard or anything like that. I really wanted to be a helper. But then I recognized that perhaps with a little more power and influence I might be able to do more. And I made that decision. And for the last 16 years, that's what I've been doing, is managing and supervising correctional institutions. And I've got another one I just started in February. And it's just been a constant kind of adventure. Tremendously difficult work, as you can imagine, but tremendously rewarding work. And that's my profession. That's what I do for a living. I do it because I believe in it mightily, but I also do it because it's my profession. That's who I am. But who am I as a person? Now, I'm one who believes, and let me go back to what I started out with. I'm one who believes that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous lasts as long as you use it and not another second. I don't think there's any staying power or coasting power or any place for peripheral members. I believe this program works in your life as long as it's a vital force in your life. It is a way of life. It's not a program. It's not I get concerned sometimes with a trend that I see developing. It looks to me like we're trying to achieve a state of perpetual group therapy or something. And for God's sakes, that worries me. I don't know how you feel about it. And that's, I don't mean to diminish the need for grappling with issues, but going into a meeting that spends an hour and a half talking about feelings and how am I doing today, and people walking around constantly checking their emotional pulse, and I think there's some real dangers in that. I've gotten concerned over the years with the drift I've seen toward a very self-centered kind of approach to AA, and I don't know where it comes from exactly. The treatment impetus, I think, has fostered it somewhat, but a thing that I call me and my program, where you get an extreme amount of personal orientation about my program and me this and my junk. This is not a me program, fellow alcoholics. This is a we program, a we program. And the day that I want to drift off and just get into some constant state of metamorphosis with the steps, I have just missed the boat. Just missed the boat. I believe you've got to stay in the mainstream of this thing. I'm a guy who believes very much that you've got to be current. It's just like money in the bank. If you ain't got none in, don't take none out, or they'll put you in my place if you do. You got to be current. I believe very much in the mainstream of this program. I'm a guy who believes in home group. I belong to the big book group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern Pines, North Carolina. I believe that everybody's member is nobody's member. And people who make commitments lightly break them easily. I believe in sponsorship. I have a sponsor myself, and I sponsor as many people as I possibly can. I believe that sponsorship is vital. It's what really brings it down to earth. I believe in that. I believe in service. I don't believe in service as an adjunct activity. I'm a district committeeman, and I'm the busiest man I know. I am the busiest man I know. but I'm not too busy to do the things that make this program vital. I'm not in service because I don't have anything else to do. I'm in service because I believe that it's a vital part of recovery and not some isolated activity for a bunch of dedicated idiots who got time on their hands. I believe it's part of it. We've got three legacies, and I think that's what it's about. I believe for every person in this room today and every person in Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe there's an avenue of service. And I believe the amount of our recovery, the satisfaction of our recovery, will depend on how well we accept and follow that avenue of service. The minute we get into self-centered lockstep, we'll lose it. We'll start arrested development or whatever you want to call it. And even if you survive, it ain't much. So I believe those things. I think it's fundamental. I'm a guy who does have a great time in this program. I enjoy myself everywhere I go because what it's given me is freedom. It's given me the ability to be who I am and where I am, and I have a good time. I'm the happiest 53-year-old man I know, and I do have a good time with this program. I'm not one who believes, and I'm going to close on this, I'm not one who believes that Alcoholics Anonymous is in competition with anything else in the world. I don't believe it competes with any other program. And on a personal basis, I don't believe it competes with anything else in my life. I do not believe that this program competes with anything in my life, nor is in conflict with anything in my life. I mentioned about the rather tenuous state of things with my wife and my kids. Now, certainly, I understand that quality time can be a misnomer when you're talking about time with your kids. I understand that time's important. But I also understand about the role of this program in bringing about recovery in our home. I don't believe it's in competition with my family. I believe it's very important that I court my family and I earn their support and recognize their tremendous importance as individuals and recognize the importance of this program in bringing the family together. I believe that. I don't believe it's in competition with my family. I don't believe it's in competition with my profession. I have some tough going in it sometimes, but I'd have tough going anyway. Yeah, I'm just that kind of guy. I'm a guy that doesn't accept no for an answer. I mean, I'm just that kind of dude. I'm a rebel. I don't believe it's in competition with anything in my life. If it is, if it doesn't make me a better husband to my wife, if it doesn't make me a better father to my children, if it doesn't make me a better citizen in my town, if it doesn't make me a better employer to the people I supervise, if it doesn't make me a better employee to the organization that pays my living, I better check up and see what happened, because I think we just missed the point of the whole exercise. This program has done something in my life that's beyond anything that I ever dreamed. I'm a guy who's had experiences that absolutely are unbelievable. Just like you said, Carol, you can't get here from there. Thanks very much.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.